Hi, I'm Chike Coleman, and that is Sanford Hess, and this is Real Reviews Rewind, the show where we rewind the clock a little bit and talk about older films that are in the cinematic pantheon of film. This week, we are going to be talking about two films. Both are older in different senses of the word. One is Funny People, directed by Judd Apatow and written by Judd Apatow, and the other one is a documentary called The 13th, which consequently enough, was featured on Thursday at this year's Ebert Fest 2018.
When was it released?
When was it released? It was released in 2016.
Oh, was it?
On Netflix.
Okay.
So I want to start with what I think is the more complicated of the two conversations, and that is the 13th, which essentially timelines from slavery to the drug epidemic through to civil rights and back again, and basically looking at how did we create this prison industrial complex of minorities, specifically African American men and women, but more specifically men. And they go through this process of talking and interviewing several different important figures within the movement, both modern and in the past, and basically trying to roadmap it, essentially. And what I thought of this film when I first saw it was I was shell-shocked. I had not connected the dots to how the prison industrial complex had been built from slavery. And I found it a unique and fascinating look into America's history. Not that we have looked at America's history enough, because I don't think we ever should stop, but it really gave me pause to understand how we got into this plight and negative situation that the world is in concerning minority population and the prison system. What did you think of the 13th, Sanford?
Well, I was going to say, I think it's worth noting that the title, The 13th, refers to the 13th Amendment, and the text of which, and I'm not going to do justice off the top of my head, but the text of which basically ended slavery with an exception, and that exception being for prison and penalty and or whatever the phrasing is of the amendment. So that, I think, to tie into what you were saying, that the movie kind of focuses on starting from sort of the emancipation and the end of slavery with the 13th Amendment, which came a couple years after the Civil War,
right,
to, which had this exception for the penal system. Then how did that evolve up until the present day? And I think where the movie really, to me, really was on its firmest ground was telling the story from sort of the late 60s through the 70s through the 80s with the tough on crime through the 90s. I thought that the section on the 90s was really the best, actually. Focusing on sort of what was the series of events that led to this situation that we're in now. So, as a history person, and also working for the city government and dealing with police issues, I found the movie fascinating. I have a few complaints about it.
Okay.
But, I found the movie really well done in the sense of telling that compelling story. Although I will kind of say that it sort of drops off around 2001. There's not a lot of discussion about, say, the impact of 9/11 on the prison population and things like that.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of... it goes in a fairly linear fashion until around the end of the Clinton years.
That's what I was going to say. The jump around becomes a problem for me within that film. If they just stayed in a logical timeline, then I would have probably felt better about it. Or referenced, hey, this also kind of parallels what happened back then, but without having to go fully back to that era for an extended period of time, then jump back to present day again, which is what I felt they started to do toward the end of the film.
Right, because at the end of the film, then they kind of started jumping around. It was more based on specific events, and it sort of jumbled up the Bush years with the second Bush years, George W. Bush years, with the Obama years. And it was more focused on some specific events, and a lot of them actually came more in the Obama presidency in the last, say, since 2013,
and 2014. And they really didn't touch on those at all, really.
It was, I felt like as good a job as they did sort of telling the initial phases, I really did feel like they petered out on the second half in terms of bringing you up to speed. And then
police brutality was really an afterthought, really.
Yeah, and it was, and I got to say, I mean, so this movie to me, I mean, so let's put aside the politics of this movie.
Okay.
As a documentary, the film is visually striking.
Absolutely.
So a couple of things that I was really like, wow, that's different. One was that I think all the documentary interviews were shot with 2 cameras. So usually one in front and one to the side.
I noticed that, yeah.
Yeah, and then the editing kind of takes you back and forth where sometimes you're seeing a person from the side, sometimes from the front. And many of the interviews, not all, but many of the interviews were set in very interesting looking locations. Angela Davis was the one who struck me the most. I mean, they interviewed her basically in some kind of huge decrepit warehouse.
Yeah, and the same weird thing for like Newt Gingrich. You thought they were on top of a skyscraper in an empty room.
Yeah, and then Cory Booker had like this giant like chair that sort of was interesting. I mean, so yeah, each of them was filmed in a very different kind of looking environment. Most of them were sort of modernish.
Yeah.
But there was not a lot of but it was striking. I mean, it was visually interesting to watch the interviews. It wasn't just a single talking head like this talking to you for 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that they did, and this one I have a little more complaint about because I feel like documentaries you got to be honest about this, but I mean, either the documentary is sort of all into a subject in terms of putting the thumb on the scale or not.
Yeah.
This one did it has this thumb on the scale, but they with the words that people were saying, or in some cases the music that they were playing sort of in between the sections, having the words appear on the screen that were being said to give emphasis to certain points.
Yeah.
So, with the music, that's one thing. But sometimes when people were talking, it would sort of, you see sort of this black kind of background. And then
with
the
words, yellow giant.
Yeah, and then the words would kind of appear on the screen and underline. And I get it. I mean, it was, again, visually striking. Although it was, well, why are they emphasizing this sentence and not other sentences? Well, obviously because there's a motive. So... yeah, and then I thought that the interviews were good. The people had interesting things to say, and then the other thing that I was sort of intrigued by about this documentary is that there were situations where they had 2 different people talking about the same thing. The one that strikes me the most was the guy from ALEC, AELC, who was sort of defending ALEC, which you have to see the movie to really get a sense of what they are.
Yeah.
And then they had somebody talking against that, and they sort of cut those 2 people back and forth as if they were having a discussion. Now, it wasn't so blatant as to pretend they were in the same room.
Right.
But it was kind of thought, counter-thought, thought, counter-thought. And it was almost like the guy from ALEC, who was hopelessly outmatched, was sort of trying to defend his position, and then here you have somebody just cutting his rug out from under him after every sentence.
Yeah. And... well, I think that's a powerful exchange and a unique point within the film. I think for me, what struck me most was the Reagan years.
Yeah.
When they started talking about crack cocaine and basically the Say No to Drugs campaign, and how visually when you look at the media at that time, a lot of this was pinned on minorities.
Right.
And I find that I never knew about that. That wasn't part of my actual
no offense,
history.
You were born at the end of that era.
Right.
In the 80s. So, I, being a few years older than you, I mean, I remember those years. But, at the same time, I also, it was interesting to me because I have memories of these years, and I remember this idea of the super predators. And that was more of a 90s thing. But, the scare that they had put into people and the crack cocaine epidemic, that was a huge media sensation for a long time, this crack epidemic. And the need for them to get tough on crime, which... I thought, for example, seeing Congressman Rangel, I believe is how you pronounced it, from New York, who here he is in his 80s, and he's essentially saying, boy, you know what? We were wrong about that.
Yeah, and to hear somebody say that was like, wait, did he really just say?
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And even they had Clinton interspersed with that as well at that same point in time.
Yeah, now obviously Clinton was not interviewed on camera, but they were, they were showing clips from speaking that he had done during the 2016 campaign, where he did kind of come out and say the same thing. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really interesting part of the documentary because here they've just gotten through this, and again, for me also, it's sort of tied the pieces together in a very eloquent way, again, especially about the 90s. And then led into this discussion of Clinton saying, boy, that was a mistake. Then having people react to that.
Yeah.
Which was, was like a dialogue.
It was great, yeah.
Yeah, so that was, to me, that was probably the best part. The last thing I was going to say, one last thing I didn't like about the end of the movie, they, especially near the end, they showed a series of police brutality videos.
Yeah, and that was the first time I saw the Eric Garner footage, for real.
Yeah, and, regardless of anything else, it just felt like shock video. It felt unnecessary. Oh, yeah. I understand they're trying to make a strong point. They want to bring out the brutality of it. It just didn't seem necessary to make a point, and in some ways actually took away to me from the movie because it sort of was a exhibitionist ending.
Again, afterthought, when that could have been another piece of the focus, even if for another 10 minutes, that could have been something that was touched on, but it really wasn't. And for me, my main problem with the film is kind of simple. You're not really given any solutions. You're given all the evidence to why this happened, but no way of how to fight it, which I found deeply disturbing and problematic. Because why would you spend 2 hours educating someone on the history of how this happened without giving ways for people of all races and of all faiths and ideologies to prevent it?
Right. No, you're right. Well, I mean...
But I didn't necessarily want a happy ending either.
Yeah, and there isn't one, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that they kind of touched on, which up until, I think it came before the police brutality video. So at some point I was kind of thinking in my mind, oh, this is really going to have kind of not an upbeat ending, but a sort of hopeful ending.
Which we didn't get, really.
Yeah, what they talked about, well, a lot of the states have gotten rid of the three strikes you're out rules. There is, reform going on in the sense of even retroactive releases. For example, California has retroactively, expunged a lot of marijuana convictions now that they've done legalization. So they I guess that came after 2016. They could have referenced those things and talk about how attitudes are changing. Yeah. To a certain extent. But then that's where, again, they kind of veered off into the police brutality aspect, which is not directly related to the prison industrial complex points they were making. Right. But it's, yeah, I get it. It's sort of related.
There's a small correlation that can be drawn, but beyond that, you're not really giving people an opportunity to say, here's where progress has been made, and that was my only main fault with the film. I feel like more films like this need to be made in this style, but if they are made, some sort of solution to how we can be more humane as a society, or how you can join whatever fight in relation to the industrial complex. Right. And the other thing, again, that made me kind of upset is you didn't have interviews with real people. When they said this movie was about the prison industrial complex and how all that was made, I was hoping to hear interviews from people who had been on one side and then on the other and now free. Explaining.
Well, some of the people they interviewed were activists who had and it said,
but that's activists, though. That's more activists than it is humans who've been in and out of this process. Yeah. And have a story to tell, because I think that would have been one other unique point where you could have modernized it, but not have it overdrawn and take 30 minutes.
Well, and I will give them credit. I mean, they included Newt Gingrich. They included Grover Norquist. So they did at least go out of their way to include people for a little bit from both sides of the issue. Yeah. Because this could easily have been a purely one-sided...
Witch hunt, yeah.
Yeah. You said you hope more of them are made in this style. Do you mean the visual style, or
I
do you
mean, I
topically?
mean the visual style. Topically, I don't know where you would take that next to make it as deeply as impactful as this was.
Yeah.
I guess you'd have to wait for more failings to occur to be like, it's been 5-10 years and this still hasn't changed.
Yeah. Well, change is not going to happen that quickly, right, by any means.
Absolutely not, no. But, I mean, there are other ways to go about that topic, especially if you're looking at the modern section of it that we didn't get to see much of.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, in terms of the visual style, I would anticipate that we'll see other docs being made kind of in the same sort of kinetic style. I can see where it appeals more to short attention span YouTube people. No offense if you're watching this on YouTube. Because it's this, you know, it's easier to digest than, say, Errol Morris, and you're watching basically a one-camera interview with one old white guy for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, even though his subjects are fascinating, you know, and the interviews are really good, it's visually, it's a whole different story.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like Fog of War and, you know, some of his more sort of straightforward ones.
So would you recommend this documentary to people?
I would. I mean, I'd recommend it for the content and also for the visual, just to see, wow, that's kind of different. I would say this does, for anybody who sort of has questions about how did we get here to where we are, it does a good job explaining how did we get here.
But now, where do we go?
Yeah.
All right.
How would you recommend it?
I would, with the caveat that you need to have a discussion afterwards. This is not a movie that I would be willing to walk away from and say, oh, I saw this documentary, it was cool. I would want a discussion.
Yeah.
Like the one we were having, or...
Did you attend the Eberfest discussion on this?
I did not, but I heard about it.
What happened, just briefly? Because I missed it there also.
From what I remember, Ava was very well received, of course, and people felt enlivened by what she showed them.
Yeah.
She only had about 20 minutes or 30 minutes before she had to rush off on a plane back to LA. But she said this is not a one and done conversation. It's a conversation that really needs to keep going.
Okay.
That's about all I can remember. The rest of it.
Well, maybe she'll go back and make the second half of the movie.
Let's hope. Let's hope that there is a modern half of the movie that gets told in another 2 to 3 years, because that was excellent. The other film I wanted to talk about today, to, I guess, counterpunch this entirely.
There you go.
Is Funny People, directed and written by Judd Apatow, starring Adam Sandler. It's also starring Judd Apatow's daughters and his wife, Leslie Mann, and Jonah Hill.
And Seth Rogen.
So here's the thing for me about this film. I'm going to read you the IMDb plot summary of this film because I can't do it justice. When seasoned comedian George Simmons learns of his terminal inoperable health condition, his desire to form a genuine friendship causes him to take a relatively green performer under his wing as his opening act.
That's all?
That's what they say. Here's the thing about this movie. It's Adam Sandler at his most subtle. Other than Punch Drunk Love, which everybody mentions, like...
I hated that movie. Punch Drunk Love.
Okay, that...
Sorry.
Okay. I don't really know what to say to that, because this is personally my favorite Adam Sandler performance, because he's allowed to be his stupid, character-driven self in stand-up, but he's also facing grim realities at the same time. And the thing I like about this film in particular, it's meditation on being a stand-up comedian, but it's meditation on what happens if you spent your entire life basically as an a-hole who didn't care about anybody and realized it was now important to care about anyone and everyone. And what does that teach you about yourself? And what does it teach you about the world that you decided to mold around yourself because of what you do?
I'm not sure I would agree that he really changes. I think it's more he
alters himself a little bit, though. for the sake
so?
of what his condition is.
Well, I mean,
He tries to make fun of it at first, and then decides, maybe it would be worth caring about these people for a little bit.
See, I don't think he cares about other people. I think he just feels sorry for himself, and he's alone, and so he follows the doctor's advice, essentially, to sort of reach out to friends and people, and he realizes he doesn't really have any.
Yeah.
And then the movie occurs, and we'll come back to the middle of the movie, but at the end, I don't think he's really a changed person.
No, by the end of it, he's like, well, I survived that, so I can go back to my normal life. But what I like is the way... I don't know if I necessarily like the way he confronts the idea of him possibly dying. I definitely can't say I like the way he handles it, because literally every other line is a joke. But the funny thing about it is the lines he's delivering, their jokes, aren't Adam Sandler jokes. It's him basically doing everything he can to forget what he has and how it's affecting him. Okay. And that's what I think makes the film powerful. I think it's his best performance, but he's not my favorite character in the film.
Who is?
The sisters. Both of the sisters. You're seeing that family dynamic juxtaposed with Adam Sandler's craziness and Seth Rogen's relentless attempts to try and be funny. I didn't think he was funny at all in this film.
Well, yes.
When either green or seasoned.
Yeah, I think part of the plot, at least his character, the way they're presented at the beginning, he's a bad comedian.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get any better. He just gets on bigger stages because he's had him hanging out with Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's not true. By the end of the movie, they imply that he's gotten slightly funnier because he's getting laughs on stage.
Yeah.
But he's still not funny.
He's still not funny.
Yeah, he's not. I mean, so okay. So I agree with you that my favorite parts of this movie were the sort of inside baseball parts of being a comedian, the stand-up lifestyle, his interaction with the other people who were stand-up comedians,
right?
And the whole LA life part with his friend who's on a sitcom, and the jealousy of that, and then I really enjoyed some of the interaction between Adam Sandler and real, people who are playing themselves.
Yeah.
So who? Okay. So, all right. Who is your favorite? So your favorite characters in the movie you mentioned is the girls.
The girls. Yeah, the girls make the whole movie for me. Looking at that family dynamic and him being, I won't say grossed out, but just oddly uncaring about anything that they went through, except when he does start to care a little bit, because one of the girls is a performer, and he kind of finds that slightly moving for a little bit of time, and then he's just like, once he figures out he's fine, he's like, okay, I can stop emotionally investing now.
See, I feel like the scenes with Amy Mann and the girls went on way too long.
Oh, I'm not going to disagree with that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, when that part of the movie happened, so Amy Mann, who's Judd Apatow's wife, plays his ex-girlfriend, and he kind of reaches out to her. And I was like, oh, okay, they're going up there, they're going to have a scene. And then it went on, and it went on, and it went on. And it was literally more than a third of the movie took place
in that home, basically.
Yeah. And I was just sitting there going, well, this could have been cut down, but it's the director's wife, so maybe that's part of it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I like her as an actress, but I wasn't buying her dynamic with Adam Sandler.
Oh, I wasn't at all either. But
and I just kind of Eric Bana as her husband.
Yeah,
that was pretty funny, but again, went on way too long.
But here's the thing. Here's why I think that was important.
Okay.
And this is the only excuse I've got.
All right.
It's that old adage of, look at the life I could have had if I was a better man.
Okay, but he doesn't absorb that lesson.
No, not at all. But I think showing that is more important than the fact that he didn't learn the lesson.
Well, to me, I mean, to kind of step back a level and get meta, what I like about this film in that kind of character arc is the bravery of the director to not have him change.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Hollywood cliche for him to sort of change as a person and he becomes better. The fact that he doesn't, I kind of respect that decision more because it's not what you're expecting.
Yeah. you're expecting him to feel like, oh, my life is better. I need to rebalance it again and be no.
Right.
This guy would never be like that. It would be a betrayal to his character if he was like that.
That's right.
And I think that's what makes the movie so amazing. And the fact that he's, well, in a way, no, actually, really, he's forced to be vulnerable, both as the character and I think as an actor here, in a way that I had never seen him be vulnerable before. And that's what made me identify with the movie. He's cruel to a lot of people, though, in this film. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to just hate the crap out of this movie because I can't stand him. Even when, you know, he's starting to see what his life could have been and what it probably should be. Like, the fact that it's kind of like if the Ghost of Christmas Past went with Ebenezer Scrooge to see how he almost fell in love with a girl.
Yeah.
And then he's like, yeah, that hurt a lot, but I'm still not going to stop making profit.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this is.
I'm going to key off your statement. I think you're right that, I mean, it's Adam Sandler in a very vulnerable role because to a huge extent, he's playing Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
And I don't know much about him personally. I don't know if he's married. I don't know if he's single. I don't know whatever. But
I've never figured that out, actually, to be honest with you.
But I would assume he's probably not too far off this character, or at least you look at the character and you think, yeah, that's pretty much probably what he's like.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he lives by himself in this huge house. He has all these servants who he never talks to, and who do the yard and all that kind of stuff. And he treats everybody poorly. I agree with you. He does, to a certain extent, though, despite all that, he's vulnerable as a character, and that is the good part of his
That's where the
performance.
sell is for me. That's entirely where the sell is for me. So my big question now is, did you enjoy the film?
Parts of it. Again,
I can't win with you.
Well, the second half bogged down. I enjoyed it. I especially, so I will admit this again. I've been watching these movies in pieces because, you know, it's just the nature of my schedule.
I respect that.
Yeah, so I watch them in sort of, more or less in 45-minute chunks usually, sometimes an hour, depends. This movie worked really well for that. I watched like the first 45 minutes, which was sort of the beginning of the stand-up phase, and I was like, oh, this movie's really good. And then I watched like the middle piece, and I was like, okay, this is good. They're developing characters. I really enjoyed the middle because one of my favorite scenes was the one, for example, with Eminem, where he's talking to Eminem, and Eminem's just this incredibly, I mean, if there's anybody more unlikable than Adam Sandler in this movie, it's Eminem.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow, again, how brave for Eminem to come on, play himself as this total, you know, no good person. To keep it family friendly.
Yeah.
And that's, anyway, so I enjoyed the middle third. And then the last third was when, you know, I watched it in another piece, and I was like, oh.
But the thing that knocks
checking
me
my
out
watch, you know, okay, when's this going to be over?
but the thing is, you're happy with the ending, so I would say that overall you did like the movie.
Oh, no, overall, yeah. I mean, I would say, would I recommend it? It's more than 2 hours long. So
yeah, you got to be prepared for a sit down.
Yeah, and if you are, you know, and don't go walking in thinking this is like a comedy.
Yeah, or like a regular standard Adam Sandler movie, because it's definitely
absolutely not.
It's the reverse of that, and that's why I chose it.
Yeah, but it is it's a very it's a good drama about funny people. And the humor is in those scenes. Yeah. But really, at the end of the day, this is a serious sort of tragic comedy, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I liked it. I was glad I've always wanted to see it. I just never got a chance to. So I was glad for the excuse to see it.
Okay, so I did get one right finally. World, if you got your scorecard at home, Chike finally has one off of the -3 he had in the last few episodes of the show. So overall, little tiny thoughts. I want to put this in because I know we don't have much time left. Ebertfest 2018, really positive experience for you.
Yes.
I only personally myself got to go to the parties, which I would argue almost is the best part.
There you go.
Because you're being a community about film, and as you know from being a GM of the art theater, that's the whole purpose we go to film, is to have that sense of community. So that for me is what I love most about the film festival this year. What are things you'd like to see going forward that you didn't see this year?
One thing that I regret about Ebertfest is that the overlooked part. So, I mean, a lot of the movies they showed were overlooked for sure, but one of my favorite things about Ebertfest, and maybe a tie here to a movie we'll talk about soon, is movies from the past year that might have come and gone, or maybe not even came to our area at all.
Mm-hmm.
I liked in prior years when there was sort of 3 or 4 of those recent films that you may not have seen, but we're going to bring them in. And that leads into maybe one of the movies we'll talk about next time.
Yeah, one of the movies we're going to talk about next time is a movie that I am going to be watching soon and am deeply excited about. It's called Columbus, starring, I believe it, John Cho. I almost said Chow Pen, but it's John Cho. And it's revolving around architecture.
Well, you'll have to see the movie, then you'll talk about it.
Yeah.
So we'll tease it like that.
And we'll be building another fantastic set of 2 movies for you to hear us talk about in 2 weeks. See you guys later. Bye.